Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Medianet webinar, where over the next 35 to 40 minutes, we will be discussing the Medianet 2023 Media Landscape Report and doing a deep dive into some of the key findings from that report, what it means for both journalists as well as those like me working in the PR, communications, and media intelligence industries. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to all of you for taking the time to attend today's session. We were just overwhelmed with the number of registrations for this event, and we officially reached capacity yesterday. Yes, believe it or not, there is still something called capacity in the virtual world. So a big hi to everyone as well who might be watching this later on as part of the on-demand sessions. Thank you for your time. What a great session we have for you today. An incredible lineup of guests on our panel who are going to be contributing to a very informative and thought-provoking discussion on the findings of the Media Landscape Report. There will be a live Q&A, so if you have any questions for the panelists at any stage, please put them into the chat option, the questions option, as part of what you can see on the screen now. And we'll do our best to get to all of your questions. Now, I will introduce you to these panelists very shortly. But to kick off, though, I just wanted to briefly share a little bit of context and background to Medianet's Media Landscape Report. We have been producing this report for the last 5 years. It's an annual survey that we do. And up until this year, we had primarily only surveyed journalists on their views and experiences, and then produced a report for the journalists, and then produced another report focused on key findings for the PR professionals. I'm very pleased that this year we were also able to do a separate survey on PR professionals and ask them similar questions, and then be able to draw some comparisons around what it meant, where the commonalities were and where the differences were. And you're about to hear all about that over, like I said, the course of the next 35, 40 minutes. This is a report that I'm incredibly passionate about. Our team at Medianet is incredibly passionate about producing and what it means, to give back to the media industry in Australia. And so I also just want to give a big shout out to everyone at Medianet that was, responsible for and contributed to the creating of this report. Okay, time to introduce you to our very incredible panel. First off, please meet Deb Camden, founder of the Communication Dividend, AMEC APAC chapter lead and board director. AMEC is the International Association of Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. She's the principal of Prism Communication Architects. Deb is also a former journalist, the first ever grad ever employed by Queensland newspapers. She's interviewed Mel Gibson, had lunch with Michael Jackson, and Deb is also a very experienced marketer, a true powerhouse. Hi, Deb, and lovely to have you here with us today.
Thanks very much, Amrita. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Excellent. Now, from one powerhouse to another, Mr. Nick Hayes, Managing Director of Media Stable, former broadcaster and now podcast host, Meet the Media event producer, expert registry founder. Nick also has an incredible wealth of experience in the media monitoring and media intelligence fields. Nick, hello.
Amrita, thank you very much for having me, and what a wonderful report you've put together.
Thank you. Excited to hear what you have to say about it, Nick. Thank you. And Mercedes Karen, the head of marketing at Medianet. She's a superstar B2B brand marketer and a PR professional who's worked across a range of traditional and digital media companies in the last 15 years. An absolute authority on content-led social media platform engagement. Hi, Mercedes.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Great. Now, before we begin our live discussion, I'm going to pass to Mercedes briefly for an executive summary of those key Media Landscape Report findings across both the journalist version and the PR report. Look, I'm sure you have all read the 100+ pages of both reports, but I thought it would be helpful just to have a quick 4 or 5 minute presentation on the key data and findings, so it's fresh and top of mind for all of us before we hear the thoughts of the panel on that. Just a reminder again, keep a thought out on any questions that you might want to ask our panelists, and I'll do my best to bring them into the Q&A section. But over to you for now, Mercedes.
Thank you, Amrita, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. As the head of marketing for Medianet, I am really proud that we get to share this really rich content with all of you and with the wider comms and journalism community. So I will only cover some of the key findings in the interest of time. There is a lot to unpack on the report, so I highly recommend that you download the reports and you learn more of those practical insights. So we surveyed 1,023 journalists and 291 PR professionals between October and November of last year. From the journalist side, 64% were working in digital journalism, 44% in print, 21% in radio, 13% in TV, and 10% in podcasting. And from the PR survey, we heard from those in agencies, in in-house teams, and others such as solo freelancers. In terms of the gender breakdown, 55% of journalists that responded to the survey were female and 42% male. The PR survey was more dominated by women, so 71% of the respondents were female. In terms of the pay, we found that PR respondents disclose higher incomes than journalists. So 47% of PR professionals said they earn more than $100,000 per annum, compared to just 25% of the journalists that responded to the survey. So now that we know a little bit more about who responded, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the key findings of both the PR and the journalist editions. The journalist edition focused a lot on public interest journalism, challenges that journalists face, on their everyday work, including mental health and money. We know that almost every single respondent, 98% of journalists, believe that public interest journalism was threatened in 2022. And they say that is due to the increase in disinformation of fake news, as well as lack of resources. Very interesting to see that almost half of journalists said they withheld from publishing information that they knew to be true due to fears of defamation or legal action being taken against them or their organization. And 41% actually said that they think defamation laws are too strict in Australia, and that makes it very hard to keep individuals and organizations accountable. In terms of the challenges, burnout was a standout. It was prominent because 72% of journalists said they have experienced it, mainly due to that, lack of resources, being understaffed and overpaid, but also due to the stories that they have to cover, such as COVID, floods, and war. And however, mental health was not the greatest challenge they say they had in 2022. It was actually money. 36% of journalists said money was the greatest challenge, and that was double the amount that we saw in the previous survey for the previous year. In the PR report, you will see that burnout is also quite prominent amongst PR professionals, with 63% of them saying they have experienced it. Here, the challenge comes from managing the demands of journalists and clients and being on call all the time for those two groups. The top challenge for them, unlike for journalists, is not money, however. It's changes in workload and mental health. And it's interesting to see that 35% of PR professionals had a journalism background, and they moved to public relations for better pay and better lifestyle. Now, I'm gonna talk a little bit about how PR professionals perceive their relationship with journalists and how they communicate with each other. For 60% of PR respondents, they perceive the relationship with journalists quite generally positive. The obstacle they face, for the majority of them, when trying to achieve media coverage, is actually finding the right contacts. Very, closely followed by finding new angles for their stories. But we also know that 45% of journalists, almost half of them, say they changed roles in the last year. So I can see how that can be quite, hard to keep track of. And journalists said that the main story sources is industry leaders. So 90% of them said that, followed by press releases at 84%. And there was an increase of 4% year on year on the use of press releases as a story source. So speaking of press releases, this might be a little bit hard to hear for all the communication professionals out there, because journalists said 70% of them said they don't read the whole press release when considering if they're going to pursue that story. They actually say they read a paragraph or less. Some say they only read the headline. So that's a bit hard to hear when you're taking all this time to craft a press release. And we also wanted to know a little bit more about embargoes. 95% of journalists say they like to receive embargo releases, with 1 day being the ideal, or the ideal notice periods for most of them. However, only 70% of PR professionals say they like to send or to use embargoes in their releases. So there's a little bit of a gap there. And I'm going to wrap up with some interesting findings around social media as well. So 97% of journalists said that they use social media professionally. The top platform used is Facebook, followed by Twitter, followed by Instagram and LinkedIn. It was only LinkedIn, however, that had an increase in usage consistently over the last 4 years. The other ones have stagnated or decreased in usage. And despite of the fact that only 20% of journalists use TikTok as professionally, TikTok was the one that had the sharpest increase in 1 year of 10%. And to wrap up, I'll leave you with this interesting gap, perhaps, or a missed opportunity for PR professionals. 70% of journalists said they actually saw stories on social media, but only 25% of PR professionals pitch stories via social media. So, we thought that was quite an interesting gap there. So that's all I have for you now. Thank you, and I'll pass back on to Amrita to moderate the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Mercedes. That was really great, and great to have that little summary before we hear from yourself and Deb and Nick. So yeah, let's get into it. I think I'd really like to start the panel discussion with one of the most important findings from the report. There's such a strong and clear sentiment that journalists believe public interest has been threatened in the last 12 months. And almost, as you just showed us, Mercedes, half of the respondents are withholding information for fear of defamation. Deb, I'd love to start with your opinion on this, please. From your perspective, both as a former journalist and also as a very experienced PR practitioner. Could you give me your opinion, your perspective on this data?
Certainly, Amrita, and I think I will start by saying that it's not surprising that journalists are withdrawing and experiencing that fear, because Australia is actually known as the defamation capital of the world. The Victorian Bar Association President, Dr. Matt Collins, speaking to the National Press Club in 2019, actually pointed out that in the UK between 2014 and 2018, there were 268 libel cases out of a population of 66 million. For that same period in Australia, there were 577 libel cases for a population of 25 million.
Wow.
And of those, 312 were from New South Wales. So, it's true, it's real, it's totally understandable. And in the past 2 decades, Australian governments have passed more than 75 laws related to secrecy and spying. So we are in a highly, restricted area of that's impacting journalists and their practice. So it's real. It's totally understandable why they are fearful. The current government is, as recently as a week or two ago had its first media roundtable, which is looking at what's going to happen in terms of public interest journalism, and so there are developments happening there. But I'll hand over back to you, Amrita, so we can explore Nick's view on who's well informed on the media side.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. And wow, I mean, there were some great stats that you just shared with us as well. So, Nick, I mean, you talk to journalists day to day across a whole range of different media organizations. You're so embedded in that kind of media ecosystem. Are you getting a sense of this sentiment too? What's your assessment on this survey finding?
Yeah, certainly, Amrita. I think that a lot of journalists, whether across print, radio, television, online media, they are nervous, and also that might reflect also to the sort of the kind of society and the world that we're living in right now. It's a very social media world. There's a lot more content being shared around and shared around not necessarily in the right way. But the number one thing other than that is that also too, journalists are getting younger, and also to the support that might be coming from the media houses in the past might not necessarily be there. So they're a little nervous around their own management, let alone what they might be broadcasting or putting out there. But there is some caution there. And also too, you put something out there, you're going to get immediate responses back. And, we all get trolled, we all get attacked on social media. But the biggest attack that you can have is when someone attacks you with a legal writ and are actually suggesting that what you're saying or what you're doing, there's another version of it. I'm more worried about this because for a free press, we need a free press to hold governments and organisations to account. I don't think it's so much different to what it was many years ago, other than it's so much more visible today. And the younger journalists out there are a little bit more cautious and won't jump into this nearly as probably the more experienced journalist who goes through that process and is well supported by a media house that has all the legal counsel ready to sort of de-risk that story. There's challenges there for them, and I understand how they feel because, we've all put posts out there that have got some negative commentary back. It only takes one person that wants to flick the switch and ask you whether what you're writing or what you're saying is defamatory to me.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And I think, really great observation there about having that support internally at your media organisation, and also knowing how to source that support if you are a younger journalist as well, right? And I wonder if there's a role there around the, senior levels of management in media organisations to make that support more visible. So, thank you both for that. Now, defamation was one challenge that came across really strongly in the 2023 report. The other one was burnout. And we saw that there in those two slides that Mercedes presented, burnouts for both journalists as well as professionals such as all of us that work in the PR and communications industry. You had 72% of journalists saying that they've experienced burnout in their media work. But, for all of us, we're asking ourselves, our teams, our journalists to do more and more with less. There are more platforms and to get their content across, more ways that you need to kind of engage with your end audience. Nick, what's your take on this burnout challenge?
Look, I think burnout is not just alone in the public relations or the journalism media space. This is across every space. So any industry is feeling it. We've just gone through 2 years of probably the hardest time that business and individuals have had to face with COVID restrictions. I mean, journalists are only just starting to come back together again. And public relations, even just the word relations, has almost been taken away from everyone to be able to do their job effectively over the last 2 years. It's a tough gig, and well done to everyone that's got through this. My take on this is that, look, journalists are being asked more than ever to put more stories together. The resources within from a media house is getting smaller, as is also the financial support that's there as well. So they've been asked to do more. PRs, oh my, you've got one of the toughest jobs going around. Not only are you trying to connect with those people, the journalists that are under-resourced, you're also competing with a lot more content and a lot more competition for that storytelling. So it is a challenge for all of us. We've got to take a moment, look after ourselves, and get back to it. But it's not alone to these two sectors. It's burnout across all sectors.
Yeah, nicely said, Nick. And Mercedes, you lead a very active marketing and PR team. You just heard Nick say, for the PRs, wow, there's just so much going on. How are you managing the kind of increasing publicity and brand awareness demands across so many different platforms?
Yeah, I mean, it can definitely be overwhelming because there's so many platforms, so many things that we think we need to do. But I don't believe in doing everything just for the sake of doing it. We actually look at the trends and the results. So we do the things that work for us. And we always joke about this within the team, but we love to repurpose content. So we know where our audience hangs out. So, for any comms professional, I suppose, their audience are journalists. And you need to know where your audience is and create content that fits that platform. Create content that enables the audience to consume it without the least amount of friction possible, so that you get that engagement and that publicity that you're seeking. I don't think you will get it by just trying to spread yourself very thin and doing everything, but more just to drive engagement on those platforms that work for you.
Yeah, fantastic. And, I can see a couple of questions coming in here about that delta that you identified, that journalists, for example, are on social now, and how do PR professionals, effectively pitch? And I think we'll come to that in a second. So thank you to those of you that are contributing the questions. But let's just talk a little bit more broadly first about how journalists source and hunt for stories when they are feeling increasingly under pressure and under-resourced. And I think that's probably a big part of the reason, in my opinion, why your trusted industry contacts, your experts, remain the top story source at 90%, right? Followed by the press release at 86%. So both remain really crucial parts of that communication strategy for any organization. But wow, I guess you need to make your mark really quickly, because they're reading one paragraph for press release, let alone possibly just the headline. Mercedes, you mentioned in the past this concept of an inverted pyramid release as a way to kind of get cut through. Could you just, for the benefit of the audience and myself, just, explain that again further?
Yeah, so this brings me back a little bit to J School, and many of, the attendees here that have communications or journalism background would probably know this. But yeah, the inverted pyramid structure goes back to the, early days of mass media, where news was distributed via the wire or the telegraph. So when, connections were a little bit patchy, they wanted to ensure that the critical aspects of a story were covered at the very beginning of that story. It's interesting that nowadays we don't have those connections restrictions or technological restrictions, but we do have restriction in the sense of the attention of journalists. So, you need to get to the point, cover what we call the 5 W's, the what, the where, the who, the when, and sometimes the how as well, right at the top of your press release, and don't bury the lead. Just get to the point straight away.
Excellent. And Deb, I'd love your thoughts here, please, on press release effectiveness, and getting that cut through with journalists.
Look, I think, as Mercedes has said, one of the things that hasn't changed is really how to express your hook, how to get your lead really working for you. And I think in many respects, the way, social media has worked, and with being in, online platforms, we get a chance to be creative, really creative in writing, factual but impactful headlines. And I mean, I think, yourself, when you're scrolling through like I do every night, my favorite sites, it's really the headlines that I'm reading. And I actually think there is an art now to writing headlines for impact. And I think that's liberating for the PR profession, because, we can actually create impact and also persuading our clients that, pretty dry corporate messaging just isn't going to cut it. If it ever did, it just won't cut it. It has to be engaging. It has to be newsworthy. And the lead paragraph has to explain all of those things that Mercedes has just said, as it always has had to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Nick, I'd love your take on how to build these really effective relationships and what you would recommend for PR professionals and industry experts. And as a bit of a follow-up question to that, from one of our audience, I think a fantastic question about industry contacts as a top source. In your experience, do journalists prefer to hear directly from the spokesperson, i.e. the CEO, or the PR or comms or marketing kind of middle layer, so kind of a double-barreled question there, if I may.
Let me get to that straight away. I think that if we can immediately go straight to the source and minimize the contact between getting to the story, then you're going to have greater success there, without doubt, because the journalist doesn't necessarily want to speak to the marketing manager, doesn't necessarily need to speak to the public relations officer. They want to go straight to the source. And I think that's a challenge there for a lot of us in PR, to allow us to be our people, our media assets, to be far more accessible to the media. And, when you've got that, you're going to have a greater opportunity and connection there with that media. And building relationships is about that word, media asset. As a public relations officer or anyone that's representing a brand or organisation, you want to be an asset to the media. So you not just want to supply them with a good story, good content, good experts. Bring everything up on a platter. We've heard the term ready-made packages. Bring everything to them and make that journalist's job as easy as possible. The more hurdles you put in front of someone, the greater the chance the story doesn't get up. And I think, that is about building a relationship and connection with that journalist, because if you get that part right first, as we all know, it's not that story that you've just pitched. It's the story that comes back next time and the time after and the time after that. It's really powerful.
Yeah, fantastic. I really love that sentiment there, Nick, about doing everything you possibly can to reduce friction in building that relationship and in getting that information to the journalist in a timely manner. So let's talk a little bit about some of those challenges in creating a PR campaign, because say you do remove that friction, right? We still had more than half of PR professionals say that finding the right contact, the right journalist, was their biggest obstacle. And that when pitching to them, that right contact is so important because, and this was a bit of a, eye-opening stat for me, more than 45% of those 1,000 plus journalists that responded to the survey said that their role had changed in some way in 2022, in the last 12 months, right? That's pretty big. I wonder if that would be reflective in our organizations, perhaps not so. So accuracy of that media contact, that media data is super important, right? And there's high burnout rates in the PR industry as well, with PR professionals feeling they have to be on call for their clients as well as for the journalists. So, Nick, just pass back to you here, please. Your thoughts on being able to identify and pinpoint relevant journalists and stay on top of that.
Well, that is our biggest job here, and that's the reason why the businesses employ us to do what we're doing, is that we know who we're talking to, we know the right journalists to get the message to, and in this world, and I think from a media world, they move and change all of the time. So if we take that as a little bit of a message to our clients and to our line managers, is that our job is to stay on top of it and be the best informed, know who's moving around, because they might just have that role for 6 months, 12 months. The day of a journalist that sits with the same column or the same portfolio for 30 years does not exist. 30 months would be just nice, but it's more like 3 years, 3 months in many cases. So that's important. And look, we've got to do our homework. We've got to get smarter with this as well. We've got to know who we're connecting with and who we're communicating to and who their audience is. And I'll harp back a little bit more about that media asset. I want to hear everyone using the term media asset. Be that. be that media asset to that journalist, because you're going to make their jobs a lot easier and you're going to have a greater chance of getting breakthrough, not just now, but in the future.
Yeah, love it. Thank you. I love that media asset concept there. Mercedes, just picking up on that and what Nick said, I mean, just, for some of those people that are listening here, can you share some tips on how perhaps, Medianet and what we do could help our clients stay on top of some of these changing media roles?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, when you want to do media outreach, you want to get high email delivery rates, you want to get high open rates, and if you want to expand the pool of journalists that you are reaching out to, not stay within the same pool all the time, and find where those movements have been happening. That's where Medianet helps, because we can do all of that so that we enable you to do other things. 51% of PR professionals said they also struggle with finding new angles for the stories and keeping up with the demands of their clients and of journalists. So keeping up with the movements in media is time consuming, it's daunting and difficult. So there's a balance there that you need to figure out if you're going to invest that time in keeping up with the changes, or invest time doing other things like building relationships with journalists, building relationships with clients, and focusing on the actual story. It can definitely be done in-house, but it does come at an opportunity cost, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you. Deb, you are a woman of many talents. You have a number of things you're working on at any given time across your own agency, your role at AMEC, your positions on boards, the thought leadership that you do in this space. What's your experience in managing all of that? And, have you ever, if you don't mind me asking, reached a burnout stage or a I am overwhelmed stage?
Yes, I absolutely have. I don't think there's, I think a person living now who isn't challenged by trying to find balance. I mean, balance is not a word I've ever been able to figure out how to do for myself. Having kids, having partners, there is always so much to do, so much consideration. And I think what occurred to me is that, one of the positive outcomes out of a terrible pandemic was a real acknowledgement of communication and public relations professionals as essential workers. Mm-hmm. We finally got, I think, the credit that we deserved for the work that we undertake and the essential nature of what we do, because at the end of the day, we translate and convey messages on behalf of our organisations to our critical publics. And so, yes, I think, burnout is real. Interestingly, the World Health Organization has actually designated burnout as a diagnosis now. So it is real. It's not something that we, I used to say, oh, I'll have a nervous breakdown when I've got time for it. Just that time never ever came, fortunately. For me, and the strategies I've had in working with, great teams in my consultancy has been to prioritize each other, to have fun, really have fun with your work, and to find the fun, because if you don't, life's too short to be, hoping that you will be happy when. So I think one of my clients 20 years ago actually recognised the importance of wellness and, health and well-being. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, this is really strange that a company would actually be beyond the person coming to work. But now, and they were well ahead of their time, it's real. You employ the whole person. And so it is, never been a better time to be able to have these conversations when you're reaching a point of burnout, because there is an obligation and a duty of care to employers to make sure that you don't reach that.
Yeah, there's a real responsibility, isn't there, as a leader, even if you're just a couple of people in an agency, all the way through to big media organization. So yeah, thank you for calling that out, Deb. If you're all okay with that, I'd like to switch a little bit to the social media topic, because I can see quite a few questions coming through regarding that, and specifically how PR and marketing teams can leverage social media to further enhance some of those media connections, Nick, that you've been talking about, and expand the reach of their story. because email and traditional pitching, I guess, is no longer just the only way to get that journalist cut through and to build those relationships. And we can clearly see from some of that data Mercedes presented that the professional use of social media by journalists is massively increasing, and 76% of them use it to source stories, but only 25% of us are, pitching on social. And Nick, you've mentioned this to me in the past for sure, that you hear a lot. One of the biggest challenges is then, the journalists, you don't hear back from the journalists. You don't know whether they've read the release. You don't know whether you should follow up, whether you should give them a call, drop the pitch, take the pitch somewhere else. So, I guess suggestion, or as Mercedes highlighted, opportunity there that, can we meet them on the platforms that they are now, which is social as one of them. So Nick, I'm going to start with you here. You're prolific on a number of social platforms. What experience and expertise on social can you share with those watching this about using that as a platform to connect with the journalists?
Well, first and foremost, if you are a participant in social media, particularly Twitter's my preferred, Facebook not so, LinkedIn, again, very good for it. If you're an active participant in it, then look out for those journalists and look out for those media streams that are there, because you can connect with them. Even on this webinar here right now, everyone who's watching and listening and viewing this right now, how many have already quickly looked through their Instagram? How many have already had a quick look at their Twitter or quick look at their email and to see what's going on? Because journalists are doing that every single day. They're cruising through, looking at, very similar to the activity that you're doing, they're looking at it as well. But one of the great assets, I still say to this, and if you are an active participant in it, and social media is about being social, is that those direct messages, those ability to tap into those journalists and connect with them personally on those platforms is going to work. Even if it is just a little shout out to say, hey, did you catch my release? I sent over to you at 9 a.m. this morning. Or I've got a time-sensitive story that might be relevant for you. I'd love to give it to you, because it's personalised. It's going direct to the journalist, and there's a relationship and a transaction here to take place. So I'm a massive believer in this. Send out your press releases, send out your news, send out whatever you've got there, but make sure that you've got those connections with media that is on a more personable nature. And on those platforms, they are using it, and it's under-resourced. I think we need to be doing it far more often.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nick. Deb, what are your thoughts on that kind of opportunity gap that Mercedes identified in that data? Do you have anything that was just kind of bubbling to mind when you saw that?
No, I think there is this real tension still in the public relations profession between the traditional approaches and digital world, and I don't know if it's going to be generational. I think as those who are hugely competent in social platforms are going to be the ones who actually are actively engaging. So I really like Nick's point about they are social for a reason. You need to be where the journalists are, and it's never been actually a better time to know and to get reactions to your work. In the old days, you'd send off an email and you'd have no idea if anybody looked at it. Whereas at least this way you can have pretty immediate indications of whether or not your relationship or your engagement's working. So I think the whole notion of a social media release is quite different to a traditional media release, and I think we've just got to get better at it, and we've got to get better at forging those relationships and being where the journalists are, as Nick said.
Yeah, fantastic. And Mercedes, quickly, just picking up there on what Deb said, and you mentioned this word repurpose earlier, hashtag repurpose or something. So your thoughts, your suggestions on some ways, people listening could look at repurposing communication content, such as that press release that Deb mentioned, into formats suitable for social.
Yeah, so we definitely love repurposing in this team. I'll give you an example of what we did with this media landscape report, right? Obviously, we sent out the press release to media. Then we started to repurpose that press release and that content to be suitable for other platforms. So we created carousels, for example, videos, static images in the right sizes that are the most effective for certain social media platforms. We're creating a webinar. We'll obviously get clips from the webinar and we'll use those on social media. I think the point here is not just about repurposing in the sense of posting the same content in the same format across many different platforms or channels. It's actually about changing the format using the same content so that it suits that specific channel. When you take someone away from where they are scrolling, for example, if they're on LinkedIn and you put a link to the media center, for example, to read the press release, you are asking that the person stops what they're doing, go away from that feed. You miss out on potential engagement with that content because now they are outside of LinkedIn, they are in a website, and they are not going to probably engage by commenting or liking or that kind of thing. So the point here is to make it easy to consume in the platform where they are, frictionless, as many of us have mentioned before.
Yeah.
And the thing is that with social media, only certain formats work. You have to have the right aspect ratio. A video has to be between 6 and 15 seconds, for example. It can't be a 3-minute video.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's about just maximizing engagement on social.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, look, getting some great questions, and we'll probably be here another 45 minutes, I think. But I'm obviously conscious of the time everyone has given us, so hopefully everyone can hang in there for another, 5-7 minutes or so. But one final question from me before I pick up some more questions that are coming through from the audience and the attendees. And Deb, I'm going to direct this one specifically to you. A lot of the respondents, when they were talking about PR effectiveness, they were measuring it by a combination of the amount of coverage the story receives as well as the sentiment of coverage. And the most kind of common tools used was around mention tracking or just media monitoring. In your opinion, are there any more impactful measurement techniques or measurement approaches we should be using as an industry?
I think that, I'm a great believer that any form of counting is a good thing. That's a good start. But really what we should be heading towards is quality and effectiveness, so the quality of the coverage, and the effectiveness of our strategy. So I think there are two things, we're looking at impact and outcome, getting to beyond just the fact that we've sent it out, the fact that it's been picked up, look at quality of coverage, and things like the reactions that we're actually creating and encouraging, as a result of what we do. There's never been a better time than there is in digital media now to know, the likes, the clicks, the comments, the downloads. It's sort of like, Houston, is there anybody out there? And now we can actually say, yes, there is. And that's what you're looking for is, have people reacted to the content? So beyond the counting and volume, which is what people sort of describe as vanity metrics, I don't see them as vanity. I think, it is a measure. It's not a terribly, interesting measure. But, I would encourage people to be looking at quality of coverage. And also, the thing I love about PR and about communication is that the insights are often in the little numbers, not the big numbers. It's often that we're looking at shifts and, feedback from smaller numbers than we are from, market research cares about big numbers. We care about small numbers. And I think, media intelligence tools are ways of actually really getting in and understanding those small numbers and the changing sentiment in real time. So in terms of tools, not everybody can afford media intelligence, but we can still access, plenty of free tools. You can set up a Google alert. You can look at Google search. There are some free channels that are available to you. You've got to do the work at the other end. But if you can't afford those things, maintaining RSS feeds from those couple of channels I've mentioned are ways that you can stay across what's going on. But yeah, to me, it's all about quality in your assessment of the coverage that you're getting.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Deb. All right, I'm going to try and tie together just before we wrap up, because I'm conscious of everyone's time. I'm going to try and tie together a couple of questions that have come through from a few of the audience that I think are working in the medical or medical research or science kind of field. So I feel like there's quite an interesting sentiment of questions kind of coming through here. I guess part A of the question, the value of backgrounders as a supporting piece of information to go to journalists. And Nick, I'll pick on you for that one. And then part B of a question as well, I think that's a valuable one, is within this whole healthcare, medical research, science area, do we have enough journalists covering it? And is this one of the areas where potentially journalists are being more cautious because of, legal action or defamation or things like that? Maybe that's part B. And Deb, I might get your opinion on that, unless, of course, Nick, you have a perspective there as well. But Nick, to start off with you, like I said at the start, you're talking to journalists day in, day out. Does the backgrounder still hold?
Oh, it certainly does. In fact, it's imperative. It's imperative because journalists know that much information, but it's about that deep. And us as scientists are very much that deep in our information, but we're on silos, aren't we? So the backgrounder is still very important. But getting back to that very key point that we found, that 70% of journalists are only reading the first paragraph, the backgrounder is in the back. We've got to win them early. And that sort of story for science, and particularly science, if you can give me a vision, a future piece, what does the future hold? It will get my attention. It'll get media's attention. And then we find out and we go deeper into it once we're committed to the story. So yes, very important backgrounder, very important to still do a very well-structured release, but I can't hit home enough that first line, that first subject line, the fact that 70% of journalists are only looking at the first paragraph. I would say that's even less to some of the more mainstream media that's running around. So we've got a bit of a job to do, but background is still very important.
Thank you, Nick. Deb, your thoughts on whether this is an area of journalism where defamation is, a higher factor, and, is this well-resourced enough? There seems to be, a lot of great content in the medical research, science and tech space.
I can't talk to, if it's adequately resourced. I think, media organisations are generally cutting back, and they keep cutting back and cutting back. I guess, that does create opportunity, though, for public relations communication professionals to, be those advocates on behalf of their organisation by providing, reliable, credible, accurate information. It does pass the responsibility back to the holder of that information to communicate it clearly and accurately. And I think in terms of defamation, I think, might ask Dr. Norman Swan about that. There are lots of challenges, I think, when you are providing opinion. There's that line between opinion and, advocacy that is a very difficult one to straddle. And I'm probably not, best placed to comment on that any further, but I think it's definitely a reality that, when you're operating in the public interest, to make sure that your information is accurate and is presented with, the requisite checks and balances.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see even some comments coming through from some of the attendees around detecting of fake news and fake information. And, there's a number of different, organisations playing in this space as well. Look, for everyone watching, I would love to carry on, like I said, for another 20, 30 minutes. There's a lot of really good questions. Unfortunately, we just can't get to everyone's questions today. I'm very mindful of the time our speakers and also all of you watching have already given us. We have captured all of these questions. I think they're, you know, some very specific ones, also some ones where people are seeking perhaps some guidance and support on an ideal media release or wanting to know a little bit more about one or two specific data points. So we will follow up with you on that and give you the answers to those questions. It's been an amazing discussion so far, so thank you. I strongly recommend you connect with our panelists, Deb, Nick and Mercedes. They are three real experts, as you can hear from the last 45 minutes of conversation. And I know they would welcome that connection. I know them all very well. I know they would also welcome you reaching out one-on-one and even asking their opinion or their thought leadership or their guidance on something. So please do that. And thank you from my side, Deb, Mercedes, Nick, for your contribution today. Such a valuable expertise, knowledge share for our audience. Really grateful.
Thanks, Amrita. It was great. Yep, we could talk all day on this topic.
Yes,
so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Fantastic. Look, for anyone who would like to know more about the Media Landscape Report, please also do feel free to reach out to me. It's available for download, both versions on our website. As I said, you know, do connect with us in follow-up, and we will get back to those of you that we couldn't get their questions to with personalised responses as well. Thank you again to everyone. Hope you have a lovely day ahead and hope to see you at the next Medianet webinar. Bye for now.